Good Monday morning to you guys. I hope you're ready for a big week at school. We're winding up the school year, which also means that we're getting near concluding our quarter all the way around in each of our classes, and that's also true of our Bible class. We have been considering this quarter in my Bible class why it is that we should believe in this book that supposedly the God that we can tell from nature exists, and even things about him and who he is, that he has actually given us some account that he wants us to read and he wants us to follow, so that one day we can make it kind of as a roadmap to where it is that he's found. How can we know that's the case? How can we trust in it? And so what we're doing is looking at these different fields that are disciplines that people study. And there's a lot of really neat information found in each one of those. And the one that we're going to be considering today is the field of astronomy. And I want to define astronomy to you, but before I do that, I first want to tell you what astronomy is not. Okay, and I don't have this written anywhere on the board, so you might want to jot this down. Astronomy is not astrology. Okay, astronomy is not astrology. What astrology is a pseudo or a false science that has to do with a trust in the stars governing our life affairs. By the way, you ever read a horoscope that has to do with the stars? You know, their alignment, their positioning, and they tell us this and that. Guys, stars don't tell us anything, okay? That is a false science, and you know, if we want to pretend or whatever, I guess that's fine, but don't put any stock in the positioning of the stars and what that tells you about the future of your life. It has nothing to do with that. That is not a science of itself. It's a pseudoscience. And so let's not confuse astrology with true science, which is astronomy. Now, I want to define to you what this true field of science is before we get rolling, and that's going to be in the top part of the board. Astronomy is the science that deals, this is crazy, here, then here, and then there. You know I like to make things confusing just for fun. So, the science that deals, okay, back over here, with the material universe that is beyond this realm, beyond Earth's atmosphere. And so it certainly does have to do with stars, but it's not astrology, a pseudoscience that says the stars tell us what's going to unfold in our days and years ahead. No, astronomy is a true science that deals with factual matters concerning the material universe beyond this little part of the atmosphere of our planet in which we reside. Now, that about which we're going to talk actually has to do with the Earth, and actually it will be involving that which is within our atmosphere, and so it almost sounds like it's a contradiction of terms right here, but really it has to do with observances, okay, things that you can see about Earth and its atmosphere, but really you need to be outside of the atmosphere of Earth before you can see and really understand these things about the planet. And the first thing that we're going to discuss comes from the book of Job. So if you'd like to turn there, that would be, Miss Nicole would say, muy excelente. So please turn to the book of Job. And in that, by the way, Job chapter 38 is where we're going to begin. In Job 38, we are going to be discussing that is one big S, and that's a little s, and that's a normal size S. When we're talking about umbrellas and distributing a math gauge, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Little baby umbrella, big mama umbrella. Okay, so we are talking about the suspension of planet Earth, and we are in the book of Job. By the way, many believe that Job is the first book of the Bible that was written. Isn't that cool? I know Genesis is the first in order as far as the chronology of events, but we do know that it was written by Moses, who lived around 1500 to 1400 BC. And the events of Job's life, and I'm going to go ahead and put this up here right now since I'm discussing it at the moment. The events of Job's life are believed to have taken place probably between the flood and the lifetime of Abraham. The flood would have occurred from the chronology of biblical and historical events around 2500 BC. Abraham lived about 2000 BC. And so let's just comfortably split the difference. And let's say we don't need a comma there. We don't do that with BC times. And let's say that we're discussing a time period, Job living of around 2200 years before Jesus was born. Okay, about 2200 BC. And I mentioned to you that we are in Job 38. Job chapter 38, so I'm going to get there with you. And we're going to read from verses 4 and 6, where this question is asked of God to Job. He says in verse 4 of Job 38, "Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely, Job, you who knows all things would know this. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk?" In other words, on what does its foundation lie, or who laid its cornerstone? Now what's really interesting is that earlier in this account, it seems that Job actually addressed this matter. And there may be some of these things that are difficult matters that Job did know, and it appears that one of these is the case, even though most of these he didn't know, and it might just have to do with his knowledge wasn't to a tremendous degree about it. But remember, there's a book of the Bible that has his name on it, and if he's the writer of the book, and by the way, when you have a character in a book, it doesn't mean that that person necessarily wrote it, but it is generally believed that Job was probably, or certainly could have been anyway, the writer of this account. Someone else may have finished it, or God may have prophetically had him write about his own death. Nevertheless, earlier in the account, in Job, the 26th chapter, and the 7th verse, the man of God himself is speaking, and he seems to answer this question. On what were the foundations of the planets sunk? Well, verse 7 of Job 26, the writer states, or in the very least the man about whom the account is, Job 26 verse 7 states, he, in reference to God, stretches out the north over the void, which is also true, by the way, about astronomy and the North Star. But we're not really looking at it for this reason. We're reading it for this purpose. Listen, he hangs the earth on nothing. So Job actually tells us in the book itself to what the foundations of the planet are fastened. And what does Job tell us on what the earth resides, or it hangs? Using his vernacular, the terminology of Job is the earth hangs upon absolutely nothing. Well, we hear that and we say, well, duh. The earth is constantly moving, okay, and it spins. It has its revolutions that it makes, and not only the rotating on its axis, but as well the rotation that takes place around our giant star in our solar system, the sun. Well, we know that. We realize that. But remember how far away from Job's lifetime we are. Job lived in about 2200 BC, guys. And so that's at least 4,000 years from our age. And of course we understand that now, that the earth does not sit on anything. However, the Greeks, who of course were still around in Jesus' time, and they are well noted for their advanced education. They were great philosophers. The Greeks had many excellent mathematicians, and we've already had this in pre-algebra. We're going to have it in Algebra 1, that in fact the Pythagorean theorem is named after the Greek mathematician Pythagoras. And he had this obsession with Egyptian triangles, and he studied those very thoroughly, and he came up with, or at least the group with which he was associated, he was kind of the leader of them, really came up with and pushed the thought process that the two legs of a triangle have to be equal of what we call the hypotenuse. Remember, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, that came from the Greeks. There are a lot of great ideas that came from the Greeks. They were extremely intelligent people. They were very educated. But what's very strange about the Greeks in relation to their beliefs of Earth's foundations and on which they were on which it was resting, their thinking was that the Earth rested on the back of Atlas. Something named Atlas. I say not someone, but something. You know what Atlas was to the Greeks? A giant tortoise. I want you to think about this for a minute. These brilliant people, very educated, very sharp. I'm really not making fun of them generally. They were so advanced in many ways beyond their times. But they thought that the Earth sat on the back of a giant turtle that was named Atlas. But they weren't the only ones that thought that the Earth rested on something. Now it was different in each circle, but the Egyptians thought that the Earth had a foundation on which it sat. All right, and as well, the Hindus, they thought that the Earth rested on something. Well, of course, now we know, especially since we've gotten out into outer space and we can look back and we can see, just like other bodies around, that the Earth, that it does not sit, I should say, on anything. Rather, it quite literally hangs on nothing. Yet in the time period of Jesus, the most intelligent and educated people of the world thought that it was sitting on the back of a giant turtle. Guys, how did Job know more than 2,000 years before the Greeks were still mistaken in their thought process? And by the way, people were for many hundreds of years even after that. How did he know already that the Earth hung upon nothing? It was like he had been to outer space and had looked back and had seen that. But of course we know that he hadn't. There's no way that Job could have written that information and been correct on his own unless someone who resided outside of the planet Earth and who would look back and down upon it could share that information with him. I want us to turn now to the book of Isaiah. We're going to look at Isaiah chapter 66. Okay? Isaiah 66 is the very last chapter in the entire big book of Isaiah, if that helps any, where we're going to have a discussion about Earth's shape. Now, the prophet Isaiah, he lived, and I don't believe you're learning about him in Miss Nicole's Bible class right now. He is a major, quote-unquote, and not a minor, quote-unquote, prophet. However, he's a contemporary of the minor prophets, meaning he lived in the same age as what several of them did. Isaiah did his penmanship, it's believed, from 750, and let's go on the conservative side and say all the way down to, as some believe, 700 BC. Now, here's what Isaiah tells us about God and his vantage point of things. In Isaiah 66, verse 1, "Thus says the Lord, Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me, and what is the place of my rest?" So God is depicted as having heaven as his throne on which he sits, okay? And then he has his feet that dangle down, so to speak. You know, we know God doesn't really have feet like we have feet, but his feet dangle down, and Mike will appreciate, you know, it's like his feet with socks and Crocs on them are just hanging down, right, Mike? I'm sure if God were to choose shoes today, he would probably choose socks or Crocs, and it would only make sense if he would wear socks with his Crocs so he could rock the socks with his Crocs. And so his feet are hanging down, his socks with his Crocs, right? And it's depicted the earth as being his footstool. Now, if your feet are resting on something like a stool, okay, how are you looking? What direction? If you're considering your feet and what they're resting on, you have to be looking down. And so God's vantage point is depicted as that, as one who's like in outer space. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying God lives in outer space, but it's like the vantage point of one who's in outer space and looking down upon the earth. Well, if he were to do such a thing, surely he could tell us what the shape of the earth is. Wouldn't you think so? And in the book of Isaiah, as he's sitting above the earth, quote unquote, and he's looking down, well, interestingly enough, that's exactly what he does in chapter 40. So go back 26 chapters in Isaiah to Isaiah chapter 40, and let's read together verse 22. Isaiah 40:22. It is he, that's good grammar, isn't it? Not it is him, because him is not it, but he is it. Okay, sorry. It is he who sits, not sets, I'm done, sits above the, what's the shape of the earth according to Isaiah? The circle of the earth. And as he does so, he sees its inhabitants are like grasshoppers because he's so far above the earth. He stretches out the heavens like a curtain. He spreads them like a tent to dwell in. But the statement is made that it is God who sits above, remember the earth is his quote-unquote footstool. It is God who sits above the circle of the earth. Isaiah, who lived in about 700 BC, who depicts God as being above the earth, he looks down, and what kind of a shape does he see with planet Earth? What he beholds is the planet itself is a circle. It doesn't say it's a perfect circle, but the idea is that it's spherical in shape. And a sphere is most similar to a circle. Why is that important? Obviously, we understand the earth is spherical in its shape, and it's a circle. But you guys know as well, if not better from history than what I do, and as Miss Nicole has discussed probably with you, I don't know if it's been this year, but Christopher Columbus, what year was it that he sailed the ocean blue? You cats remember that? Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Don't make fun of me as I write in blue. This is the way I remember it. He sailed the ocean blue in 1490. Ho-ho! Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. As I write in blue, that's the way I remember it, you. I'm done. So, it is AD, understood, 1492. BC comes after the number, AD comes before. Don't forget the number. So, AD 1492, Christopher Columbus went on a very important voyage, did he not? Okay. Now, Christopher Columbus, I want to give him credit, and we certainly should do so, that he also believed that the earth was round. But as he went out on his voyage, and at that time, I will dare to say, and as you learn from history, that while Christopher Columbus wasn't the only person by any means in 1492 who believed that the earth was round, he wasn't exactly in the majority at that time. And there were people who were afraid that as he went out on his voyage across the open ocean, that once he got to the end of the earth, he was just going to fall right off the end. Because it was commonly thought, even late in the 15th century, it was commonly thought that the earth was flat. However, Christopher Columbus bucked that trend, and he went with the latest evidence that was at hand, and he thought, even though he wasn't in the majority, he thought, no, the earth is round and I'll be okay. I'll just continue to sail around the earth. Well, people were starting to come to that realization in the 15th century AD. But guys, Isaiah wrote in 700 BC, more than 2 millennia before it was understood and readily accepted that the earth was round. Isaiah lived in a time period when most people thought that the earth was flat. In fact, almost everybody thought it back then. But how did a man who was by no means a scientist, certainly not an astronomer, definitely not an astronaut, never having been outside of Earth's orbit before, how could he tell us what Earth looked like as if he were in outer space? Well, according to the claims of his book, he said, the guy who's telling me to write these things, he lives in a place that's outside of this Earth's atmosphere, and he looks down on it, and here's what he tells us that he sees. He looks down and he sees the shape of a circle. Something that people would not realize until thousands of years later. Guys and gals, if there were just people who are uneducated individuals, as who many writers of Scripture are, by the way, who are writing these things down, they could know, there's no way they could know these things from the field of science, and in particular medicine and health and astronomy, and as we're going to discuss, which is a whole lot of fun next week, from the field of maybe my favorite, physics. You are going to love it. I have every confidence. As always, make sure that you've copied it. If you haven't yet, pause the video. Make sure that you've copied down everything that's on the board. The green might not be showing up beautifully. However, everything's been stated, and I did look, and I think you can still see plenty clearly enough as to what it is. Make sure that you have these notes for our test that we're going to be taking. Understand the difference between astronomy and astrology, and know some important dates and some important findings, not only from Scripture, but also from scientific discoveries as well. All right, guys, that is all for Bible today. I hope you're having a great day, and I will be talking to you very soon. I'm going to be doing math class, but some of you have already had it. I'll see you guys later.